So, welcome to this special edition, the Halloween Hangover edition of Network Roundtable. And the fun continues, as Katrina and I were just talking about in the green room. It's just been a really weird event all around. But we're going to persevere, and I am thrilled to have Katrina Fancook. Did I get that right?
Yes.
All right. Here with me to talk about asking. Now, we've been asking ourselves some questions in the green room, like what the heck is happening today? But we're actually supposed to be talking about business. So, Katrina, maybe what you could do is give us an idea of whether you think asking, kind of as a big concept, is something that even applies to business owners.
Absolutely, but I think often people think about it in a put-upon way, if that makes sense. They feel as if they're putting someone out. They feel as if I'm an entrepreneur and I'm supposed to be showing my worth and what I'm really good at, if I ask someone for assistance in a particular area, that means that I'm not showing up as my full self, and they're concerned about what that is going to look like for their image. So I think as a business owner, it's how you ask, it's who you ask, and it's how you feel about what you're asking for, if that makes sense. It's sort of like a little bit of, you have to kind of feel into the energy of each of those.
Yeah, well, and I love the last one, how you feel about what you're asking for, because I think your initial comment was exactly correct. Mm-hmm. People often see asking as putting yourself in a position of weakness.
Yes.
Right? And in certain situations where you're asking for help, that might be kind of a vulnerable situation. But let's think about something that happens to business owners a lot more often, asking for the sale.
Yes.
Right? And that's something I really want to talk about, because I think there are people who absolutely actively hate the notion of asking for the sale. And there's a whole industry that's been created around how to ask for the sale without ever asking.
Right, right. Well, and I'm sure because of a lot of the people that you're working with in coaching too, that's where they get stuck a lot, right? In terms of how to position that. Do you want to do the song and dance? How direct do you want to be when you're sort of positioning your sale? And it really, I think, has a lot to do with your personality too. It's like me asking, how I would ask for the sale wouldn't necessarily work for other people. So you have to kind of finagle that in a way that makes sense for not only your clients and who you're talking with, but who you are and how you're showing up as a business owner. But it definitely has to do with that permission part of us. We all have that. Well, the background.
Exactly. And what do you think, this is something I think about a lot because it's one of the things I help business owners with, but what do you think about the notion of value? Because I think sometimes what happens is we put ourselves in this position of inferiority because we don't see the value in what we're providing.
Yes.
And so we put in our heads, oh, I'm asking for the sale, so I have to be kind of the supplicant, oh, please, put my hat in my hand and please give me some money. When realistically, if we feel confident in the value that we're providing, we're not asking them for anything that they shouldn't be excited about.
Right. Well, and in that confidence in your own value, that takes some time. I think sometimes people, when they first put a package out there or they create something that maybe doesn't hit the roof like they'd like it to, and it's maybe lagging a little bit, or they're not exactly sure how to get people to the door, that is part of the challenge. And they lose their confidence a little bit thinking that, well, what I put together must not have value then, when it's really just about the path that you're creating to get there, maybe confusing to some people. They may not understand the steps in the sales process, and it has nothing to do with the value of what you're offering at all. It's just sort of how the sales process is oriented for you. So I think a lot of people jump to the conclusion when first they kind of need to take a step back from that. But when you're asking for the sale and when it comes down to your value, people have their own value system for everything that they choose. So because it doesn't resonate with yours doesn't necessarily mean that you're not providing value. But if you can get information out of them about why, like, hey, this isn't for me at this time. Oh, would you mind telling me why? If that's comfortable in that situation, I think will help you sort of shape what you're crafting in a different way. I think, I've been a writer for a very long time, and at first it was, you know, oh, nobody puts their rates online because why would you do that? Then everybody would know what you were charging. And now it's sort of like, well, would you really go to a website without having any idea what anyone's charging for anything? So just seeing the transition of that over time, and how would you handle a sale in person versus a person that's going to purchase something from you online. It's a very different process. And just think of how drastically that's changed in 1 year, let alone 5 years, if you think about it that way. So, I mean, I'm just going to use SEO as an example because it's funny to me. It's a game that changes all the time. The sales game is changing all the time, whether people, you know, think about it that way or not, just with how Hangouts has evolved, how different sales platforms have evolved, and that's not necessarily going to change. So the more confident you are in the value of what you're providing, you can find a way to work that into the platforms that make sense. So that, especially with the clients that I work with a lot of the times too, they don't know their creative value. So the more that I can help them just become really, really fine-tuned in that, they can apply it to all those different areas and work with how the flow of commerce changes, because it is always going to change.
Yeah. Well, and I like what you said there about helping people understand their value, because I think sometimes, and we could spend an entire show talking about this, but I think sometimes people are so hesitant to box themselves in, and I say this as someone who has this problem, so I'm not at all criticizing, but you don't want to say, I just do one thing, yeah, right? Because you're afraid, well, but maybe this client would come along and I could do what they needed too, and that would bring some money in the door. But as someone who's worked with owners to help them get clarity, do you find that it's a really good idea to start small, not meaning, you know, not getting a lot of money, but just start with one element of what you can provide and branch out from there? Or is it better to kind of take this, I can be a generalist and I can help everybody approach?
Well, it's funny, you're asking me a very interesting question, because if someone said to me, well, hey, you can help me with creativity, what does that mean? Well, it's a broad spectrum of things when you're thinking about creativity, and that's a definition that's different for every single person. But really, at the source of what I'm doing is helping you get clear on what lights your heart up, and how can we explain that in a way so your creativity is showing in all you do. So it's a broad thing that can be really kind of narrowed down. So I think for a lot of people, when you're first starting your business, you have to try a lot of different things. Are you going to get the exact right answer off the bat? I don't know. Maybe you're lucky and you'll be the one person that nails it, and then you're a millionaire instantly. So I mean, and you kind of have to think of the motivations of people too. Like if you're looking at your business as an opportunity to grow, you have to be willing as an entrepreneur to play with the parts that come together. So I would suggest, yeah, start with something that you feel is really valuable, you are confident in, and then sort of see what happens. You know, everyone has to have that starting point, and then you kind of play with what little pieces work from there. Maybe you offer a really small service and notice that, well, out of the aspects of this, only, you know, this seems to be where my passion is going, or where more people are interested, and then you can kind of shape things from there. But I do think being way too general on the web is hard for people. If you're talking with people one-on-one and you're meeting them in person and they get to know you, I think a generalist like approach to selling isn't as bad, because they're really wanting to connect with you too. Not saying that online stuff isn't like that, but we all know that as much as online and in-person stuff, we'd like it to be the same. There is a differentiation there.
Yeah, well, and I think that's where another part of asking comes in, yep. And it's harder to do online because you don't have the person in front and you don't get so many cues, yes. Right? And that's the part where you're asking a client, for example, like what you said, a client says to you, well, now's not the right time, instead of just saying, gee, I'm sorry, let me leave. If you're face-to-face, you can say to them, well, I understand that, but, you know, could you tell me maybe the top 2 reasons why now's not the time? So you can find out, is it something to do with them, like they don't have any money, or is it something to do with your product that you could possibly make more attractive or explain in a better way?
Exactly. And that is different, absolutely, in person, because you can read so many more of the subtle emotional clues, what their face looks like, their body language, just if they look rushed. There's a lot of those kinds of things where, you know, you're not always doing a hangout with people. You can't always see their face or get connected with them in that way. And I also think that, you know, online there is that perception that it's online, it should be free. There's a lot of, you know, we give a lot away for free. And it's important that people understand our value, but where do you find that balance between what you give away and still retaining the value of, okay, well, this is the point where you need to start paying, and what justifies that jump too. So I think as a whole economy, the web is still learning out how to figure out how to do that in an effective way. I don't really think that there's a strong answer that works across the board for every single person in every single business.
Yeah, well, and I think that's part of why it's hard as a solopreneur or as somebody who works in a very small team to step out there and take that risk, right? Because if you look at what's out there on the web, a lot of times it's, 3 tips to have 1,000 followers, 5 ways to make money on your blog, and it seems it's very formulaic approach, and you say to yourself, well, I tried that, and why is it not working for me?
Yep. And you can get down on yourself very easily for that. It's funny. I'll tell you a quick little story. I went to a farmer's market over the summer just to get some vegetables and stuff. And I was talking to the guy that was working there. He had just quit his job. He was looking to transition into doing something else as an entrepreneur, and he wasn't quite sure. And, he was asking what I do. And I told him, well, part of the work that I do is I'm a writer. And he's like, oh, that would just be so amazing. Then I could travel all over Europe and just write things, and people would pay me. I'm like, okay, if you're thinking that that's how it works, awesome. But, it takes a long time, even as a freelancer, to build up that experience and kind of get in with the right people and get the right sites and all that stuff. I mean, just the freelancing part alone in any field is like that. So I think it is interesting and romanticized in some ways, like, hey, if I could just make this part work, then the money will be falling into my bank account and I don't have to do any work for it because someone else followed these 3 tips. Well, part of the reason that people are putting out those articles is to build their own expertise. If you think about it from the flip side, it's like, well, this is an expertise that I know and I can share and I'm willing to give away for free, and it makes me look like I'm offering a key to something that will sort of be the hook. And, I think you have to kind of look at that stuff online and with a double-edged sword, I guess, is sort of the best perception. Not that it's negative in a sense, but just be aware.
Right. Well, and I think it's interesting, too, because it's something that I've kind of studied a lot of different people who sell online, clearly, as ways, trying to find things that they do that could benefit me or that would make sense for my clients, and also, gosh, there's no way. I could never do that, even if it works for them. And something that I found very interesting, which I haven't heard a lot of people say, but I think is true, is that there are probably, in any given group of potential clients, there are probably 10% of the people who can take what you put in a blog post or, an ensemble of blog posts or, all the free stuff you give, and they could actually never give you money and still be successful with what you've said. Right? There's 10% of people who can do that, okay? There's another probably 25 to 30% of people who, for whatever reason, it's just not the right time for them to buy. They like what you have to say. They want to follow you. They want to, they'll keep hanging on and taking your free stuff, not because they don't want to pay you, but just because it's not the right time for them.
Yeah.
But then there's 60% of the people who, if you explain to them in a way that makes sense why the direct thing that you're selling, the course, the consulting, whatever it is, can help them do what they need to do faster or better, they're ready to buy. But it's that point between they're ready and helping them see the value where they get lost.
Right. Well, and if you want to throw asking into that point, can they do that without having to interact with you? Is it something that you're going to give them that's self-encapsulated where they just get to take it and run with it? Or is it something where they're going to be working with you and sort of asking you for advice? And what kind of learner are they? Sometimes people really need that structure to consistently show up and do that sort of thing. Other people just want to take something and run with it and do it on their own time.
Okay, and so that's interesting because I hadn't thought about that aspect. So sometimes it's not even the ask. It's not even the way that you present, here's your next step and here's how much it costs, but it's the format that it comes in.
Yes.
And now that you say it, you're totally right. But there are some people who really, what they want is they want the interaction. They want you, and not in a bad way, but they want you to hold their hand. They want you to be there every step of the way. But if what you're dealing with is a group of clients who actually are more hands-off, and you're offering them, let me hold your hand,
Mm-hmm.
they can't see the value because that's not what they need.
Right. You're giving them something they're not asking for, really.
Okay.
In that sense. And yeah, I mean, it almost feels overwhelming at times because you're like, well, I'm not a mind reader. How am I supposed to know what every single kind of person's going to want? But if you can get within your own client base, say you're a really new business and you've only worked with 2 or 3 clients ever. If you can get a good composite of what those clients look like and say, okay, if I'm going to work with a person like this, most of the time they're asking me these kinds of things, or we're connecting in these sorts of levels, I think that will help. But I also think a sales process changes over time. So what you start with, and then you see what rolls in, and then you still have to kind of change the ask. You have to sort of say, hey, am I positioning this? Am I asking at the wrong point? I will say this, I work with a lot of people that are very excited and they are creative, but they also have a lot of other skills. So they're mindful enough, and they show up to me and they're like, okay, well, I know that I can do these 3 things, and I need you to help me with this. So they're a lot of the times dictating, because they've done the research, they know that they've either read my stuff or they've connected with me and followed me long enough, and they're like, well, I know that you're offering all this, but what if I just want this one thing? So how do you offer more segregated services to people? When someone shows up and says, okay, well, if this whole package doesn't work, how would you service me or help me in this one small space? Well, that's not necessarily something you're always prepared to answer. Even though that's what they're asking for, you're just like, I don't know, I haven't thought about it that way. So I think sort of being prepared to offer some things a la carte can be helpful, because when you're changing the ask, you can sort of position, well, say, oh, maybe this big thing isn't for you, but how about something smaller in this form? And you never know. I mean, people might bite on that. I mean, that does happen for me at times too. So I'm just speaking from experience.
Yeah, well, and I think that's interesting, because that's another element of asking, and we did touch on it, but I'd like to come back to it.
Sure.
This notion that you have to listen to your client, but you have to have a conversation, right? So especially in social media, that starts to get hard because there's so much information. You come back online after you've been off for an hour, and there's 300 new posts waiting for you and 30 new tweets. How do you even pay attention to all that as a client? And so as a business owner, how do you ask the right questions, or how do you get your questions noticed so that you can ask your clients what they need?
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's really about that preparation. And I know a lot of the work that I do with people is about being mindful, because you have to start from a mindful place and be really clear on what you're offering, so that, okay, I'm going to show up today. Maybe my day goes off the rails and it isn't what I expected. But at the core of what I know that I want to do, this is in alignment, and I think this what I'm hearing my clients say is this. And so the more present that you can be in those conversations, and not be afraid to have the conversations, because you really don't know what they're going to ask you, and you don't know what they're going to say until you actually have that conversation. I think online there is a sense of structure and boundary about how you want to communicate with those people. It's like, for some folks, they want to do Hangouts all the time. That's the only way they want to chat. Other people would prefer to do like, hey, let's do a little survey first. Tell me what you think you need, and then I can respond to you that way. That's kind of how I work with some folks as well. So I think it's about really defining how do you want to interact with your clients. And maybe the client at level A doesn't get the same interaction that level C or D does. It just sort of depends on what you're creating for yourself, because the more mindful and the more grounded that you are in your own, how you want to approach your business, it's going to be a lot easier for you to actually be in tune and listen to what your clients are saying, because you're very present. You know exactly where you're at, or your energy's at, and it makes it a lot easier to listen. At least that's my personal experience. The people that I've talked with about the same topic agree. I mean, it makes a lot more sense that way.
Yeah, well, and I agree with you too, in the sense that we've probably all had the experience where, in fact, you're in kind of a heated discussion, right? And the other person is talking, and you don't care at all what it is they're saying, because in your head you're planning the next thing you're going to say to attack the last argument they gave you. You're not listening, right? You're not actually hearing what's happening. And I love the notion of mindfulness, even if for business owners it seems a little woo-woo. Really all mindfulness means is what you said, being present in what's happening right now. So, even that mental gymnastics of just, I'm not going to jump ahead because I know it'll be my turn to talk in 30 seconds. I'm going to stop and I'm going to listen to what this person is actually saying to me, because maybe I'm going to learn something I didn't know.
Yeah, and if you can learn to listen into what people are saying, you actually can have a lot of fun with it, because you'll know, oh, this is the ego talking. This is them trying to show me that they're right, but they're not really listening. You know, it's like you can sort of notice that pattern in people, or hey, you know, I keep notice that they're using, you know, the word fear a lot or change a lot. Like, what are some key words that they're saying that help you sort of tune into, like, even though they're not coming out and saying this one statement, I can kind of get the gist of some of the keywords or some of the things that they're throwing out here, where I can sort of lead the conversation and help ask them more direct questions. Because the best part of the listening is that you get to ask more pointed questions and get to the truth of how you can actually really be collaborative. I mean, I really do like to think of a sale as a collaborative process. One person is getting money, one person's getting a product or service, but really what you're doing is collaborating in an exchange so that you're each getting something that you need in hopefully a positive way. And if you can think about it that way, then yeah, the listening could take the form of actually like a conversation. You know, I will say this as a writer, it is very frustrating when people, I know they've been to my website and they're like, oh, so do you offer this? I'm like, yes, I do. It's on my website. But, you know, not everyone's a writer and not everyone's a reader. And so I've had to learn to be like, yeah, it's cool. I mean, you want to work with someone that's a writer, but you don't want to read my stuff. That's all right. That may not be who you are. But that tells me something very clear about how I need to communicate with you. And maybe, you know, phone calls are better than emails because you're not necessarily as in tune when you're reading, for example. I'm just, you know, kind of giving sort of lighter examples. But there's a lot of little messages that you can get in there if you're paying attention and you're present.
Yeah, well, and I really like that because it's something, the devil is in the details, right? Yeah. And it's very easy to have this big, grand, great plan, but the truth is the execution is what makes or breaks it. And if you can develop that habit, at least to me, and it's something I've got to get better at, but if you can develop that habit of actually really listening and asking the right questions, not because you want to make the sale, but asking a question about what genuinely is troubling your client, you can find some amazing stuff.
Yep. Yeah, and you can flip that around too. I'll use this as an example because I will collaborate with people sometimes. Like if I'm working with a community or whatever, I'll write a blog post for them and say, hey, you know, they'll help promote it if I write original content for them, and I do that occasionally. But then, you know, sometimes they'll come back later and say, hey, it's time to do a post again. And I was like, well, there wasn't much structure here. Are you expecting this all the time? Like, I feel that sometimes when you're even doing something that helps to promote yourself, you feel like you can't ask questions about how is it structured, how am I supposed to show up in this, how do I perceive my business collaboration with you long term when there hasn't really been a discussion about it. And turning that around is very important too. You can't be afraid to ask, okay, we've done this, it's worked, I enjoyed it, but where is it going? Because I feel that sometimes people get dragged into commitments that they can't keep or don't really want to because they're afraid to ask about, well, what is it exactly that I'm committing to? You know, what in the big picture, what is my commitment here?
Yeah, well, and that's interesting because I think a lot of times it is fear that holds us back from asking those questions, whether it's about a collaboration, whether it's asking a client, for example, why they don't want to buy our product or why they don't want to renew their service, or even, you know, like we talked about, the big one I think for a lot of people is asking for help.
Yeah.
But it seems to me that a big block to asking is always this fear. And what is it? The fear of people thinking you don't know what you're talking about, or the fear of, I mean, you know, everybody has stuff they don't know. Actually, it's kind of silly when I think about it now. But why are we afraid?
Right, and your clients might be afraid to ask you questions. That's kind of what I was getting at, too. It's like if they're on the flip end of this, they may feel stupid or like they aren't getting it if what they read isn't clear, or they're unsure and they're not sure. They just don't know how to approach you about that, and they don't want to waste your time. Like, you just don't know all of the patterns and things that they have going on before they're kind of getting to the point to ask you further. And if they can't get the pieces that they need, then they kind of just, it just may be a question of they were too fearful to take that next step and feel like a bother if they're asking you more.
Yeah. Well, I know that some of those questions, for example, a lot of people have FAQs on their websites, you know, things like that to try to address that. But is there one of the things I've been toying with is actually doing small videos.
Yeah.
You know, like, okay, this is a question lots of people ask, and so please don't think it's a dumb question. You're not the only one that's asked this question, otherwise I wouldn't be doing this video. So
Right.
here's the answer.
I think that's a fabulous idea. I mean, with the fact that you're already comfortable on video and you can do them quickly, I mean, what better way to help other people feel at ease than taking a common question and just sort of making it easy for folks, especially when it's money related. There's such a other dynamic of fear around money and asking that's different than other areas. And I do think that financial things can get complicated for folks, and they would actually really appreciate having a person and a personality to attach those answers to. I don't know, it kind of personalizes the whole financial aspect of things.
Yeah, well, and I think, I mean, thank you first for that. I hope that's what I'm able to do. That's my goal. But do you think that that personality, or at least that feeling of somebody cares enough about me not to make fun of me when I ask,
Yeah,
is an essential part of whatever it is we're trying to achieve with our clients?
I think so. I mean, even more importantly, if you just put the focus and the stress on, hey, this is a really important question and a very common question. So sort of taking the context of stupid or not stupid out of it altogether, I think if the more you could focus on the positive parts of it and say, hey, I get this question a lot, and you know, it's actually a little bit more complicated of an answer than people realize, or whatever, however you want to position it in that way, I think is very important. And you know, you can't ask what you don't know how to ask, so it just might be you do a video and you position the question in such a way, it's like, oh, I never thought about it that way because I didn't think to ask it that way, but now I get it. So it's a lot about the wording, and you know, we can, as creative people, we think of all different ways to ask questions, and you know, the same words don't necessarily resonate with every person.
Okay, yeah, and that's true. Sometimes that's what we were talking about earlier is what's our 60%? You know, sometimes you can get them and they're there and they're like, yes, I need it, but then you lose them in that last 10 meters, you know, trying to get them across the finish line.
Yeah, just like some people might watch video and other people are like, no, I just want to read FAQs.
Right.
I just read their website. So, you know, what you're doing as an entrepreneur is making sure that you have a little piece of something in every sort of area. It's like, hey, maybe you don't love video, but you could do a little quick podcast or something, whatever that works. And if you don't like to deal with technology at all in that way, then make sure you have a very thorough FAQ page. But the more you know yourself, then you can start with what you're comfortable with, then sort of see what that client interaction is, and then you'll know if you need to make additional pieces of information to support your sales process in that way.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot because that's part of, I think, what we all get overwhelmed by as entrepreneurs is we're like, oh, but you know what? There's 12 social media platforms, and then I have to do video, and then I have to blog, and it's like, just start with something. Just start with something.
And you know, some people would much rather do a video blog every week. Maybe they talk for 5 minutes. They don't want to necessarily write a blog ever. You know, that's just not their deal. But they're fantastic on video, and so they can do those 5 little short, 5 minutes of video every week, and that's how they reach out to their folks, and they can send it out that way. I know I may make some fans, I may make some foes when I say this, but I really can't stand Facebook. I'm not on it. I'm on it as a person. I used to be on it as a business. I just don't like the platform. And as much as people really feel that that's a viable platform for them, it doesn't work for me. So you're not going to find me on there. You might find some people are very wonderful and share some of my blog posts on there, but it's never me doing that because it's for me. It's mostly for personal reasons, and I pretty much go on it once a week at best. And it's only because I have to. So I mean, if you listen to all the experts and say that you have to be on Facebook, there's a lot of people that still feel very strongly about that. So what do? Well, you have to listen to yourself and say, am I going to want to pull my hair out being on this platform every day? Maybe. But I can stomach it for an hour a week. Okay, well then maybe that would be an okay platform for you. I just found that it didn't work that way for me, so I chose other things. You know, I even jumped into Google+. It's funny because I'll talk to in my local town, I'll kind of go to meetups and things like that, and there are not a lot of people around here that are on board with Google+. And so I was like, yeah, you know, I've started on this new platform. I think it's really awesome. I started on it in January of this year. And every time I go to those meetings, I was just people were giving me crap about it, basically, so I just stopped talking about it. It's like, well, if you don't know what you're missing and you're just going to make fun of it because it's crickets and 5 people, well, then I guess I'll get to connect with the right people, and you'll still be here on Facebook twiddling your thumbs or trying to pay for ads or whatever else you're doing over here, right? So everyone's going to have their favorite platforms. Everyone's going to have their approach, but you think about it. You're sitting in the chair every day. You're going to have to spend time. What do you want to do? Because it's where your clients are, but do you want to feel horrible and drained and like irritated at the end of the day, or do you want to feel empowered and connected and happy at the end of the day?
Yeah. Well, and I'm with you. I'm not on Facebook at all. Like, not even personally. My relatives, if they want to get in touch with me, they have to send me an email. So.
All right.
I'm seriously hardcore, not Facebook for me. But that brings up an interesting point, because I think one of the things that maybe we think about asking as asking somebody else, right? There's always this kind of opposition and this jockeying for position, and if I ask, it puts me in a position of inferiority.
Yeah.
But something I'd love to get your take on is the questions we should ask ourselves as a business owner.
That is a very good question. Well, for every person that's ever talked to me or read any of my stuff, the first thing I'm going to say is, can you spare 5 minutes for yourself every day? That's the first question you need to be asking yourself, because you have to spend at least 5 minutes in quiet, alone, phones off, everything else away from you. 15 to 20 minutes would be amazing, but I realize that people with kids, busy lives, can't always do that. So basically ask yourself, am I worth it enough to take 5 minutes for myself today? Because that's important. And then the more that you get in the habit of doing that, you're able to tune in and listen a little bit more. And then I think it leads to the other questions that you need to be tuning into. So we'll start with that one. Another important question I think people need to ask themselves is, does this make me happy? Do I even know what it feels like to do work that makes me happy? Because a lot of people don't. And I did work for a long time that didn't make me very happy, and it drained a lot of my energy, but I felt like, well, I have the skills and it pays, so I should do this. And, you know, I'm not going to lie and say, you're going to pick a career that you love and it's unicorns and rainbows and money's going to fly into your pockets, because that would be a lie. Right. But you have to be honest with yourself that the longer you continue to do something that doesn't really resonate with you or make you happy, it's basically costing you in other ways. And another question I would say is, you know, what is your tolerance level? Because there are things that every business owner has to do that we don't love, but it's part of our work, and if you can't hire someone to do it, you need to. So what is your tolerance level for certain kinds of tasks, and how can you either limit them for yourself or set a boundary? It's like, okay, I'm going to work on this for 20 minutes today, 15 minutes today, whatever that is for you. And sort of stick to that schedule. I know as a creative person, I'm not necessarily big on schedules because I don't like other people making my schedule for me. But I am very tuned into, like, okay, you know, as a writer, I'm not good at writing in the morning. Some people wake up in the morning, it's the first thing they do. They go ahead and they get real started. But, you know, you got to ask yourself, what kind of person am I? How do I want to show up in my business? If I work better in the afternoons, why am I forcing myself to get online and do all these things in the morning when it doesn't really resonate with me? And I feel like by the time I get to my peak time, that I'm drained. So, you know, most of the questions I would say is just really tuning in and asking yourself. These are all sort of dynamic aspects of that. And then at the end of the day, ask yourself, how do I really want to connect with my clients and customers? Yes, I want money for my services. Yes, I want to provide something of value here, but, you know, what is it, in what way do I really want to connect with my clients? Because maybe you don't necessarily want one-on-one contact with them all the time. You want to set up something that's very automated. They go through the process and then they're on their way. So it's very, very important for you to realize, like, if you do want to work with clients and that's part of how you're going to handle your business or your business structure, how is it that you really want to interact with them and really value those relationships? And not because an expert told you to do it some certain way. Not because you went to a weekend seminar and that said you had to do these 10 things. Take those things into consideration, but really kind of figure out for you what works. And that's a process of trial and error. You aren't necessarily going to know that. You'll know a part of it, but you got to live into it. And that's the one thing I would say for entrepreneurs mostly, is live into the answer, because it's not necessarily clear as much as you think it is. You have a starting point.
Yeah. Well, and it's so funny that you talk about how you want to interact with your clients, because that's something that I went through myself. When I started thinking about what I wanted to do, I was coming off of direct consulting. Mm-hmm. And so all I wanted to do was not have to trade my time for dollars. I was just convinced that was it. I don't want any more appointments. Nobody else call me. I want to make it all automated, and all they have to do is just look at my video, which was really great, right? Except I sat down to record these videos, and I recorded, I think, 6 different times the same set of material. It was supposed to be a course, right? I recorded it 6 times. I didn't finish it. I finished it, but like with these big pauses in the middle where I got up and walked around my office and I was like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever done. I can't stand this. Why would anyone ever listen to this? This is crap. And what I realized out of that whole thing is I'm not at a point right now where recorded video, at least for all my things that I have to say, is a good medium for me. I need people to interact with me. Maybe not one-on-one, but I need someone in the audience listening to what I'm saying. Otherwise, I can't give the information in a way that makes sense to them. Right. So I had to retool, right?
Yeah, I'm so glad that you said that because I'm very much the same way. If I sat and talked to a video camera by myself, I think I would absolutely have the same challenge, and I have had that challenge, which is part of the reason I haven't really done a lot of that. There's so much more juicy, creative fun that happens when you're actually playing off another person, you know, and to me, that's where the real learning comes out. Like when I teach a class, the students are learning from each other just as much as I'm guiding them in a certain direction, and there's juiciness in that, and a lot of people that wouldn't work for them at all. They want to stand in front of a room and just say things and, you know, give a speech and then people clap and then it's done, and, you know, that doesn't work for everyone, but I think as an entrepreneur you owe it to yourself to figure out, yeah, what works for me, what doesn't. Yes, it would be great if it made me $1 million, but you can't necessarily listen to people that make $1 million to tell you how to run your business. It's very much an experiential kind of thing.
Yeah, I agree, and it's so funny. Real quick break, I just want to say a huge shout out to Cheryl Deuce and Dave Pipe, who actually made it from the other event, because that other event was still out there and it had all these gremlins on it, and so people were a little confused about the fact that we're on a new event and a new look and all this other cool stuff that's happened to us today. But anyway, so hello to Cheryl and Dave. Thanks so much for being here. And for anybody else who's watching but has not commented, we appreciate all of you being here. And I wanted to ask one more question. Well, I wanted to add to the list of what the questions I think entrepreneurs need to ask themselves. Because I think quite often, since many of us have been an employee at one point in our lives, we forget who's in control. And so the question I always have to ask myself is, wait, who's in control here? Is the business in control, or am I in control? Because you look at your list of to-dos and you say, oh my gosh, and I have to do this, and I have to tweet 5 times, and I have to do a post, and it lets you get out of control because you turn yourself into a slave for something that you started as a way to be free.
Ah, exactly. Well, and what a great check-in, right? Especially when you're in that moment when you're starting to feel really overwhelmed. That is an amazing question to ask yourself, because you're right. The structure that we create, we can change at any time because we've created it.
But that's scary, right? Because it's all up to us. That's the part that's hard.
Yeah, but I think you bring up an excellent point in that if it's feeling clunky and you feel really overwhelmed more so than you feel in flow, then you really need to rethink that. Not necessarily because you have to change it immediately, but just entertain the idea. It's like, hey, if I actually change this to 3 tweets a day, how does that feel? Because I'm a very feeling person, so I very much feel it in my body. It's like, okay, if I'm getting a yes or a no, it's like, okay, this feels better. And not feeling like you've done something for so long, you have to keep forcing yourself into it. Doesn't mean you should toss it out in the trash immediately, but think about different ways to play with it before you continue to commit to something that doesn't feel like it's running you. Like you were saying, it's very important to realize that, yes, I have a business, but it's not running me.
Well, and I think it's I think it happens, and it happens to everybody, you know. So please, again, I'm not at all saying it doesn't happen to me, but you can't live there, right? You can't spend 15 years of your life, or 10 years, or 5 even, in something that was supposed to bring you personal freedom, really, the right to choose, the right to live your life the way you wanted, and all of a sudden you go right back to the way that you looked at having a job. That's the way that you're interacting with it.
You're an employee in your own business, which to some degree you have to do employee-like tasks, but yeah, you're exactly right. And it is something that we very easily lose sight of, especially on busy days, because yeah, working hard as an entrepreneur is a very integral part of getting your dream to come into something that's bigger than what than just the creative seed of it. But it's also important to have a life, and it's also important to balance that with the desire. And I think one people really often forget is that if things feel clunky and they aren't working and you feel consistently frustrated in a particular area, it's telling you it's something. It's giving you information and an opportunity to shift it. You don't have to keep doing it that way. If you work around all the workarounds and it still ends up that, well, it's kind of clunky for now, then maybe it's just a short-term thing. But nothing's ever permanent. You just kind of have to be aware that how are you wanting to work with it right now? Is it still serving you right now? And then figure out a way to transform it over time. Because it is very easy to get overwhelmed and just be like, screw it. I don't want to do any of this.
Well, and I think unfortunately that's what happens to a lot of business owners is they get to that overwhelm point and instead of being able to take that step back or to ask themselves the question, why am I overwhelmed? They react in sort of that employee mentality, which is, screw it, I'm going to do something else.
Well, and a lot of it's tool. For example, for me, I've been on Hootsuite for a while. I don't like Hootsuite. And for the longest time, I was like, I could be more active on Twitter. I don't really want to deal with it. And then someone told me about Buffer, and now I tweet all the time because I just like the interface of Buffer better. It works better for the kind of person that I am. So sometimes it really is just a matter of reevaluating your tools and sort of saying, I don't really do. Is it the task I don't like, or is it a tool I'm using to complete the task that I don't like?
Well, and that's really interesting. Someone that I really admire a lot and who I think is going to be on our show a little later in the season, Kate Hanley. Mm-hmm. Have you ever read any of her stuff? Because you would really like her, I think.
She sounds familiar, but I don't think, I can't say for sure that I have. I may have in passing.
Okay. Well, I remember one particular post that she did about resistance. Mm-hmm. And she said sometimes resistance is always an encouragement to learn something, right? Yeah. So it's always trying to get you to look at something, but sometimes what it's trying to do is to get you to create space.
Yeah.
Right. So sometimes because it's a problem, you don't actually have to take action on it right away. Sometimes what you have to do is just let it sit.
Absolutely. I could not agree more. Like pushing so hard all the time, that doesn't allow you the presence. It doesn't take you back to that point of mindfulness that we were discussing earlier. Because if you keep pushing, then you're not giving yourself a chance to sit into a solution. You're just pushing and sort of, I don't want to say spiraling because it sounds very dramatic, but I mean, in some ways that's what you're doing. You're kind of like spiraling to just try something instead of sitting into what's next, because we don't always know the answer. You could let's put it this way. You could have the best business plan ever. You could plan all of your social media. You could do all these things, and then none of it works. You just have to kind of, roll with it as it goes, and sometimes the answers will show up when they're ready, and the resistance is a very good, not only indication for you to sit and be quiet, but also it's a really an invitation to be quiet too. It's like, do it, but you have to take the invitation to actually act on that.
Yeah, I love that. And it's something that I have a very hard time doing. So it really resonated with me as sometimes the solution is just to leave it alone.
Yeah. Well, and giving yourself permission to do that. I think as entrepreneurs, we feel like if we're not working every minute of the day, then we're not being productive or we're not doing something. And that relates exactly back to the point you just made. There is subconsciously processing going on. You're picking up on things. You're sort of tuning into like, hey, do I want to incorporate this into my business? And, you hear those things where people just at the right time had something like the right relationship, the right collaborate, whatever that was. Well, you didn't plan that. You were in the right space at the right time, and you were open to it. If you're so busy pushing out things actively all the time, you're not giving the space for anything to come in and actually like let it happen. It's important to do.
Yeah, it was great. Anyway, I'll drop a link I'll find the post. I'll drop a link in the comments. But everybody should really check her out. But I think you would really like her.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I'm glad that you mentioned her because I would. I love the more people that talk about that, the better.
Yeah. And so we've got about 15 minutes left, although we may not go all the way. But I think we ought to tackle the big elephant in the room.
Okay.
Asking for help, right? Because this is the one that I think no matter how secure you are, it probably always gives you a little bit of butterflies.
Yeah.
So what are some things that we can do to get comfortable or to get better at asking for help?
I think it's important to get really clear on how you want to ask for help. Like for some people, it's I want to write down these 3 bullet points before I even have a conversation with a person, and I want to ask in person, or I want to ask on a phone call. Like figure out how you want to ask, and then figure out what you want to ask. And even if you don't necessarily get to all of the things that you were angling for, it is important to get comfortable with how and what exactly that you're asking. Now, if it's for a sale, that's obviously going to be different than if you're asking for help with a task. But, for me, I always try to stay open to, okay, who has expertise in this area and who would be willing to just actually have a conversation with me. Sometimes people are offering a service and I'm like, hey, maybe can I just take you out to lunch and pay you for 15 minutes of your time or whatever that is. So I think it's about the dynamic and the person that you're choosing to connect with to ask for help. I don't know, I think asking family for help is an even harder thing sometimes, especially when you're an entrepreneur because you want them to already see you as successful. So asking family for help in that instance can be quite challenging. I wish I had better advice on how to do that. But, I think that's, again, one of those things where you just kind of have to feel into the moment and into the person. But I think the less explaining, the better when asking for help. It's just, hey, this is where I'm coming from. I value your opinion and I value your support. What do you think? And don't necessarily come out and say, I need this, as much as like, hey, I'm struggling with this. Like, be honest with where you're at. And you really are basically just giving people an invitation to step up and help you in a certain way. If you're just kind of sort of explaining the situation versus feeling like you have to go in there with a story all put together about why you need help. Does that make sense? People can sense that vulnerability in you and they're more willing to help.
Right. Well, and I think it's interesting what you say, because I think this notion of wanting to have the story and wanting to have exactly all the scenarios lined up, and I'll ask like this, and then they'll say this, and then it'll happen like this. Yeah. I think some of that comes from, some of it clearly comes from the fear of them saying no.
Sure. Right?
But some of it also comes from the fear of not knowing. Mm-hmm. Right? Like you may have in mind a specific thing that you want them to do. Mm-hmm. Right? And so when you've kind of locked everything down and said, this is what I want you to do for me, they may have had a totally different solution that was even better or more elegant or quicker or whatever than yours. But when you lock them down and you kind of say, no, this is what I want you to do, mm-hmm. sometimes I think that actually makes it harder for you.
It makes it harder for you, and it really kind of clamps down the creative exchange, right? Because as you said, you may not necessarily realize that they have a different angle, but at the same time, it's sort of, you're putting parameters on how someone's supposed to help you. And that's not really necessarily fair. Yes, in the end of the conversation, it may not resonate, and you guys might not end up helping or collaborating or whatever it is, and you don't get your help from that person, but you still have to allow them to help in whatever way. And I do think that most people that are in a position of wanting to help you will ask you more pointed questions and say, okay, well, what were you thinking? How do you think specifically this would help you in this way, or whatever? You kind of have to give the other person a chance, because otherwise, someone brought this imagery to me a while ago, and I thought it was always an interesting thing to think about. It's that you're basically playing a chess game with yourself, right? You've got all the pieces on the board, you're already kind of doing the whole thing, figuring out what they're going to say, like you said, the volley, and that doesn't really leave a lot of room to play a game. Not that what you're doing is playing a game, but you are offering the opportunity for people to step up, and you ask them for a reason. You trust them. You know they're wonderful people. They've got skills. Let them step up and do that.
Yeah. Well, and it's something, I think the vulnerability part of it is very hard for a lot of people. Like you said, you get this impression that being seen as vulnerable takes away from your professionalism or from your success or from your reputation, whatever, which I find very interesting, because I think what you said is true, which is when people actually see you being genuine and saying, I don't know, but I value your opinion, what do you think? I don't know many people who would say no to that.
Right. You're just opening up a space for them to step up and do what they do and be themselves, right? That's the great part. And you can't ever know what someone's going to say exactly. You can guess. Right. But, you know, I'm very honest with some of the things that I don't know, too. Like, technology-wise, I'm like, yeah, you know, I could learn how to do that. I've tried, or, you know, I'm not super into that. I really need some support in this area because it's very frustrating to me, and I have trouble figuring it out. Like, whatever it is your reasons are for wanting to do certain things or not wanting to do certain things. And, you know, more often than not, you realize that you draw in people that happen to have those skills without even trying. Yeah. You know, or you find out they didn't have those skills. You didn't know until you started saying, hey, you know, do you happen to know someone that can help me with this? I'm struggling a little bit. And they'd be like, oh, I can do that. I didn't, and you just had no idea that they even had those skills in their back pocket, which is another cool way to do it. Right?
Yeah, well, and again, what it does ultimately is it creates a relationship with that person, because now you know more about what their skills are. They know about, you know, more about what you do, because obviously in helping you, you're going to explain something about what you do. You know, it can only benefit, like, even if they don't say that they're going to help you, maybe by asking a few questions, they'll also help you figure out what you really need.
Exactly. It's like a whole brainstorming process that can happen. You know, and for entrepreneurs especially, it can be very isolating, because the people that they live with don't necessarily have that sort of conversation with them. You know, they're kind of doing their thing, and you can kind of have some crossover. But, you know, I actually belong to a co-working space. I'm not sure if you've heard of co-working at all.
Yes.
Yeah, so I do that, whereas I'm going once a week to connect with other folks that have a variety of different skills. And so if I'm like, hey, you know, I'm working on, and you know, we talk about what we're working on, maybe some places that we're stuck, or I know what their skill set is, and I think because they're in a co-working environment, really just love sharing their knowledge. It makes it they're excited to be able to share what they know with people. And they don't expect anything. I mean, yeah, obviously if they're doing a lot of services for you, that's something that's a little bit different. But if you have a question, that's one of the great things about co-working specifically, is that you can show up and be like, hey, I'm really stumped on this, and I've tried everything I know. And it's, you know, quick little one-off things that are very helpful and supportive. But, you know, that is that environment that fosters that. So, you know, I would also say for entrepreneurs, find an environment for yourself that offers that. You know, maybe it's a professional organization. You can do that with them. If there's a co-working space near you. It just so happens that a lot of the coworkers that I co-work with are either other writers or programmers. So between the two people, we've got, you know, types of people, we've got a lot of the stuff covered, you know what I mean, in terms of, you know, struggling with business stuff. But, you know, there's always ways to find people like that in your own area. But I would encourage people to do some of that, because in your head thinking all the time gets you in that rut of trying to plan all the answers.
Yeah, and the one other thing that I was thinking as you were talking is, I think sometimes we convince ourselves that we have to build a case, right? Like we have to show these people why we deserve their help. Yet, that, just like you said, most people, no, they're not going to build your website for free. No, they're not going to write you a business plan for free. But if you ask them a specific piece of information, or better yet, a recommendation, almost everybody is flattered by that and would love to share what they know and say, oh, you know what, try this or try that, or talk to so-and-so.
Right. And that's been one of the great things just about Google Plus in general. I feel that as a platform, people are very happy to share not only their knowledge, but connect you with people that can help. And so if it isn't necessarily an opportunity for you to do that in person, definitely online, there can be organizations, forums, that kind of thing, that provide that sort of support from, you know, the online version of that support anyway. That can be very helpful. And yeah, I mean, I think anyone that's in business for themselves can relate to the business struggles of another person in business for themselves. It's just, even though what we do is different, we all have to tackle the same sorts of growth points, starting points, completion points. Like, we're all sort of on that spectrum in different ways. And so the more you can connect with people in that space, it allows you to sort of share your experiences too. Everybody loves a good story. I mean, who wants to sit at home thinking this is only happening to me? Because it's not true. It's just happened to someone else on another different day in a different version. So, you know, being comfortable with telling your story, I think, can be very helpful too. When you're asking for something, don't oversell it. Just be like, hey, you know, I'm having a little bit of a challenge with this, and this is maybe why. Just can't get too wrapped up in the story. There's the delicate balance of overselling the story, getting lost in the fear, so feeling like you have to provide a case, and just being honest. And that takes a little practice. That doesn't necessarily come easily. Believe me, we've all had to practice. I've had to do it too.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always complicated, but I agree with you. The only way to get less uncomfortable is to keep doing it, right? And, you know, it sounds really trite, but the truth is practice doesn't make perfect, but practice improves.
Right. And if you're an entrepreneur, there's a part of your spirit that is ready to kind of get out there. I mean, you don't become an entrepreneur without that sort of sense of spirit with taking that little step into the next adventure. So if you do start to feel overwhelmed, just remember, it's like, okay, there is a reason why I did this. You know, there is a reason why I chose to become an entrepreneur, and can reconnect with that, because it will help you sort of take a step back and reconnect with the power behind why you're doing what you're doing in the first place.
Yeah. Well, that's really super. I love the adventure metaphor as well. It's something I use. So I love it. And we are, hard to believe, but it's already been an hour. I thought that we were going to wrap up early, and here we are going over time. But I really appreciate you being with us today, Katrina. Thank you so much for sharing all of your experience and your ideas about asking in all its forms. And first off, any closing thoughts? And then second, tell everybody in the audience where we can find you.
Yeah, sure thing. The only other thing that I would say in closing is that find a way to appreciate yourself for all the things that you do every day, because as an entrepreneur, you are working very hard. And the more that you can show appreciation for yourself, it will help with some of these other areas where you don't feel, quote unquote, as proficient as you'd like to be. So just kind of keep that in mind if there's a way to add a little gratitude to your day for yourself. And if people are interested in learning a little bit more about mindfulness and creativity, and sort of really stepping up to fire up your creative juices, then you can visit me at creativekatrina.com. I write a blog twice a week, so that helps with kind of kickstarting creativity and just giving people different mindsets to think about. And I also do editing and creative coaching, so they can use some of my services to help support their business too. Great.
Well, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And we have survived the Halloween hangover. Are you happy?
And thank you so much. It's been great to come back. I feel so professional with my little overlay there. It was wonderful to come and chat with you. And I'm just excited that I learned something very new about you today. That you and I sort of operate in that same sense of liking to have a little bit of replay back and forth. So I guess maybe that's why we're the only two that showed up today.
Who knows? But there's good news. There's good news. We were both here, and we both had a good time. And I think we got some really interesting perspectives on asking for our Super Troopers. That's our audience members. So I want to say a big shout out to everybody who watched us today. Thank you so much for joining Network Roundtable. Yes. And I am Stephanie Sims, and I will look forward to seeing you guys on Friday. We have actually, this week is a double-decker. The double-header. No, double-decker is a sandwich. Double-header is when you play 2 games in a row. And so we will be back, Network Roundtable will be back on Friday with Gina, Fidel, and Alex to be talking about stepping back. So you won't want to miss that. And once again, thanks so much to Katrina for being here, and we will see you guys soon.
Yes, thank you, Super Troopers. Thank you, Stephanie.
You bet. Bye.